Good morning. This morning we're continuing our series on serving wholeheartedly. Now, I'm not an optometrist, so it's written in vertical level. There was a story during the Korean War. This is the story taken from Charles Swindoll, an American preacher. So no offense to any Koreans here, okay? During the Korean War, there were two American soldiers. They were stationed a long distance from the conflict. And they were allowed to rent an apartment off the base. So they hired local Korean boy to do their housekeeping. And they were immediately impressed with his positive and joyful spirit. So they began playing pranks on him. You know, sometimes we can't stand people who are too positive. And when the spirit is too good, they play pranks on him. So they nail his shoes on the floor, put water buckets over doorways, smear grease on the stove knobs. And the boy would smile and pull out the nails, dry himself off, clean off the stove with never a word of complaint and smiling face. And finally, these people became ashamed of themselves and told him that they would stop their pranks. And the Korean boy looked at them and said, "You mean no more nails, shoes to floor?" He said, no more. No more water over door? No more. No more door over floor. No more grease on the stove? Oh, no more. Everything is fine. He smiled again and said, "Okay then there'll be no more spit in your soup." This is called smiling assassin, isn't it? Sometimes external we may appear to be well and good, but you don't know what is inside of us. And so this morning, I want to steer your heart and challenge you as we serve God, that we serve God wholeheartedly. And I'm very thankful for this church. We have many helpers. Without so many helpers, the church cannot function. Just on Sunday alone, there were so many people have to roll up their sleeve to do some work in order to make this service possible. While we're sitting here, having service and singing, there's a group of teachers there teaching the young ones. And the song, it doesn't appear like this. They rehearse, they come to practice and all that. So we are thankful to God for you, for serving so faithfully and wholeheartedly. So this morning, I want to again further impress upon your heart that as we serve, not just only externally or outwardly, but our inward motivation is utmost important. So serve God wholeheartedly. James MacDonald says that this passage in John 13 about Jesus washing of the disciples' feet, he said, Jesus washing the disciples' feet is the most supreme act of humility in all of God's word. It can move you to tears if you're there, that God came in the person of Christ, descend into that level of washing feet. I'll expand on that. Many years ago, Mark Twain wrote this that resonated with me very much. He said, "It is not those parts of the Bible that I don't understand that bothers me. It is the parts that I do understand that bothers me." And so today, I want to look at this passage. I think no one can walk away looking at John 13 and say, "I don't understand." But it is what you do understand that will bother you more than what you do not understand. So this is what I'm going to do for the time that I have with you. I want to go through John 13 with you. The 17 verses. I'll give you 3 points just to unpack the text, just so that I'll be faithful to this text. And then I'll give you 4 applications on serving God wholeheartedly. And then I'll conclude with one final, very important point, especially in verse 17. So as you know, we are leading up to Easter. It's the Lent season. And then the final week is called the Passion Weeks, leading to Good Friday and then Sunday, Easter. So this is the Passion Sunday. At that time, Jesus entered Jerusalem on Sunday, which is Palm Sunday. And then on Monday, he cleansed the temple. On Tuesday was a day of conflict as the religious leaders sought to trip him up and give evidence to arrest him. You can read 21 to 25. Matthew 21 to 25, he covers the Tuesday's drama. And then on Wednesday, probably was a day of rest. But on Thursday, he met in the upper room with his disciples in order to observe the Passover. And then it is during that day, Thursday, that he began to wash the disciples' feet. So let me give to you 3 points as I work through this text with you. The first point is the love of Christ. The love of Christ. If you read through these 3 verses, the 3 things will jump out at you. And that is the phrase, Jesus knew. His action, subsequently of washing his disciples' feet, is depending on what he knew. It says 3 things about what he knew in these 3 texts. It says, first and foremost, it was just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. He knew his time is now. If you remember when he commenced his ministry in John chapter 2 by turning the water into wine, when the disciple came to him and said, come on, do something. Mary said, come and do something. He said, my time is not here yet. Jesus walked on God's timetable. His timing is always perfect. Never faster, never slow, always perfect timing. So at this moment, Jesus knew that his hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Let me pause there for a while and progress that before reading the second half of verse 1. And then the evening meal was in progress. The devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. So second thing that Jesus knew is that Judas would betray him. It's not directly spelled out in verse 2, but if you go down to verse 21 in John chapter 13, it tells you, one of you is going to betray me. Jesus knew. So Jesus knew that his hour has come. Jesus knew that Judas is going to betray him. And thirdly, it also says that Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So 3 things it tells us in those 3 verses what Jesus knew. He knew that his hours was come. He knew that Judas would betray him. He knew that the Father had given him all things. And then let me backtrack down to the second half of verse 1. And because of what Jesus knew, here it tells us, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Right until the end. This reminds us that Christ's love is constant. He loves us not only when we are faithful, but even in our weakness. He knew, as I said, he knew all things. He knew that Judas is going to betray him. He knew. He knew that Peter is going to deny him. He knew all these things. And even what he knew, he still loved them to the end. He loves us in our struggles and our failures too. Charles Spurgeon, known as the Prince of Preacher, says this. He said, for breadth, the love of Jesus is immensity. For length, it is eternity. For depth, it is immeasurability. And for height, it is infinity. Every aspect is covered, isn't it? That is Christ's love for us. Someone said that the shape of true love isn't a diamond, it's a cross. The shape of true love isn't a diamond. not when you go down on your knees and propose. The shape of true love isn't a diamond, it's a cross. So the very first thing that we need to establish in this text, that we can see it is the love of Christ, loving them to the end. And then secondly, I want to show to you is the humility of Christ in verse 4 and 5. The humility of Christ. It says here, he got up from the meal, he took off his outer clothing or garment, he wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. We don't have such tradition, but Catholicism, they have such tradition. On a Maundy Thursday, the Pope will often go into prison, and they will select some prisoners, and then the Pope will go down on his knees and wash the prisoners' feet. That is the tradition. I have only done once in my life. When we were in Pakistan, when we were in when we were in Pakistan, and once in India, when I led a mission group to India, before we commenced our mission, we washed each other's feet in a hotel room. And in Pakistan, we did the same as well. After we trained a group of Pakistani coming together for a few weeks training, and after that we sent them out to various parts of Pakistan attached to a church to do ministry. We washed their feet and we commissioned them to say, please go as a servant. Please go to the church not as someone who knows it all, come and teach you what to do. Go as a servant to serve in the church for a couple of weeks. We wash the feet and send them off. And so here, Jesus, the Son of God, takes off his outer garments. He wraps a towel around himself and begins washing the disciples' feet. And please understand that in that culture, foot washing was a task not even reserved for the lowest form of Jewish servant. It was reserved for the lowest Gentile slave. So a Jew who is a servant won't do that, because it is too, no one would do that. Jewish servant won't even wash the feet. It is only reserved for the Gentile slave. And yet Jesus, the Master, our Lord, humbles himself to serve them. God humbling himself to the lowliest task. Please, as I said of Mark Twain, we understand, right? This one you cannot not understand. If this is our God, his sacrificial love should cause us to surrender our lives to him. And as a result, this act was shocking. That's why Peter resisted. Peter objected. He said, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet. No way will I allow you to do that. No way can I allow you to do that. Because he recognized that this was not the role of a teacher or a rabbi, not even a Jewish servant, let alone Jesus, who is God. And of course, Jesus said, well, if you don't allow me to do this, you will have no part of me. Here we see that true greatness in God's kingdom is not about power or status. It is about serving others in humility. And Jesus calls us to do the same. I read many of Philip Yancey's books in the 90s and then in the 2000 early days. He wrote, prolific writer, many books. We have many of his books in our library. You can grab of it. What's so amazing about grace? The Jesus I never knew, the Bible Jesus read, and many other books. And he, in one of his books, he says this. He said, Jesus gives us a model for the work of the church at the Last Supper. while his disciples kept proposing more organization. Hey, let's elect officers, establish hierarchy, set standards of professionalism. That's a KPI. And Jesus quietly picked up a towel and basin of water and began to wash their feet. That's all. That's the model. That is the model. Just take up the towel and serve. And serve. Humility of Christ. The third thing I want to give to you is the example of Christ. The example of Christ. After Jesus done all that, and then come to the part of explanation, which is quite clear. It is the scripture passage that you understand. Here it says, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes, he returned to his place. And then he said, do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. Do you understand? Do you understand what I've just done for you? Jesus said. You call me teacher or rabbi, you call me Lord, and rightly so, because that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. Cannot be misinterpreted. Very clear, very simple to understand. He makes it clear, if he as the Lord is willing to serve, so must we. So serving is not just a duty. It is the defining mark of a follower of Christ. It is a defining mark of a follower of Christ. And Jesus didn't just tell his disciples to serve. He showed them how. He set them an example. Can you imagine someone smoking and keep telling him, please don't smoke anymore. And at the same time, just puffing. He said, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Serving God is about action, not just words. It's easy to say we love God, but true love is demonstrated in service. At the end of the day, we often use this phrase, right? Actions, what? Speak louder than words. Yeah? At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. Whatever we say, whatever we profess, whatever we confess, it will be authenticated through our action. We cannot claim to serve God while ignoring the needs of people around us. As John says, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he says the incarnation is the ultimate reason why the service of God cannot be divorced from the service of man. The incarnation itself tells us that. The whole act of God coming to us in the person of Jesus Christ is the reason why we cannot divorce serving God and serving others. Jesus gives us an example. There's a book written by a Canadian author called Blue Like Jazz, a guy called Donald Miller. And in it he says this, he said, I never liked jazz music because jazz music doesn't resolve. But I was outside Baghdad Theater in Portland one night when I saw a man playing the saxophone. I stood there for 15 minutes and he never opened his eyes. And then he said, after that, I like jazz music. And then there's a postscript to this. He says this. He says, sometimes you have to watch somebody love something before you can love it yourself. It is as if they are showing you the way. And Jesus showed us the way to serve. He gives us an example. And how true it is that we need leaders who will serve and servants who will lead. So those are the texts that you look at. The love of Christ is manifested there, the humility of Christ, and the example of Christ is mentioned in those texts. Let me move on to give you some very practical application on how to serve God wholeheartedly, since this is our topic. The very first one is we have to serve with love. We have to serve with love. While our motivation for doing something sometimes can be out of fear, sometimes can be out of guilt, sometimes can be out of duty, all kinds of motivation we have, isn't it, to spur us into doing something. But I think our ultimate motivation is we serve with love. It is love. Even Paul says, right? Love compels me to do what I'm doing in going to the Gentiles and spread the gospel. Love compels me. Even 1 Corinthians 13 is a whole chapter on love. In verse 3, it says, if I give away all I have, but have not love, I gain nothing. So you may give everything away. But if your motive is just to show to people how generous you are, you gain nothing. So our motivation must be out of love. Because experience tells us that we can serve the Lord out of many motivations. But the highest motivation for serving Him is love. Don't need to judge people. Just serve with love on your own. It's okay. Don't worry about others. Leave it to God. At the end of the day, you give account for yourself. You can't give account for other people. You give account to God your own. If you judge people, you have no time to love them. And it's easy to judge. It's more difficult to understand. Because understanding requires compassion, requires patience. It requires the willingness to believe that good hearts sometimes choose wrong methods. Sometimes good hearts choose wrong or poor methods. And understanding, it comes with compassion, comes with patience, comes with willingness to understand. Through judging, we separate, but through understanding, we grow. So serve with love. Look at the cross, what Jesus has done for us. Look at the example of Christ in John 13, stripping down, and it's to motivate us to respond to what God has done for us. Lord, thank you. I'm doing this back to you because you have redeemed me, you have saved me, you have given me a second chance. I lay down my life to serve you. Secondly, serve with faithfulness. Serve with faithfulness. Faithful service means consistency. Day in, day out, you serve. Nothing should distract us. Service to God. Don't let your work, don't let this distract you from serving God. Even sacrifice some of the things so that you can have a bit more time to serve God. Do that. It's worth it. In eternity, you will be very, very glad that you did that. Don't always say, only after retirement I serve God. Don't say that. It's always now. You can't do now, you can't do in the future, because you never factor into many things that will happen in the future. It's always now. Luke chapter 16, Jesus said, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in the little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. Serve with faithfulness. Serve even though it is difficult. Timothy Keller, one of his profound quotes that I really like is, even if our own troubles are great, we should still serve. Jesus washed his disciples' feet on the way to the cross. He knows that he's going to die. He still served the night before he died. He washed the disciples' feet on the way to the cross. Serve with faithfulness. This morning at our prayer meeting, I read a writing by Max Lucado about prayer based on the fruit of the spirits. And in it, he said about criticism. And then he added this. He said, criticism is a tool of a lazy thinker. When you want to serve God faithfully, don't worry about criticism. Shut them out. Shut them out. Focus on Christ. Have you heard the story about the tiny frogs? There was a bunch of tiny frogs who arranged a running competition. And the goal was to reach the top of a very high tower. A big crowd had gathered around the tower to see the race and cheer on the contestants. The race began, and honestly, no one in the crowd really believed that the tiny frogs would reach the top of the tower. You heard statements such as, "Oh, it's way too difficult. They are never going to make it to the top, or not a chance that they will succeed. The tower is just too high." The tiny frogs began collapsing, one by one, except for those who, in a fresh tempo, were climbing higher and higher. The crowd continued to yell, "It's too difficult, no one will make it." More tiny frogs got tired and gave up. But one continued higher and higher and higher. And this one wouldn't give up no matter how much the crowd shouted at him. At the end, everyone else had given up climbing the tower, except this one final tiny frog who, after a big effort, was the only one who reached the top. And all the other frogs naturally wanted to know how this one little tiny frog managed to do it. A contestant asked the tiny frog how the one who succeeded had found the strength to reach the goal. And then it turned out that this tiny little frog who was the winner was also death. Was also death. So serve with faithfulness. However difficult, it's okay to serve God. Don't let it be the first thing that you drop. Number 3, serve with humility, as we have already established from the text of Jesus. And one of the greatest barriers to serving God with all our hearts is pride. Jesus washed the disciples' feet so we could have the perfect representation of humility. That is the utmost, ultimate expression of what humility is all about. Does God ask us to do what is beneath us? This question will never trouble us again if we consider the Lord of heaven taking the towel and washing feet. Jesus says, as he spelled out the statements in 10:45, one of the key verses in Mark, Jesus said, "Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now mark down that verse. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, if you read the whole chapter 10 in context, you know why this verse is so, it is a punchline. Because the disciples were fighting for position. Let me sit on your right hand. Let me sit on your left hand. And then Jesus concludes by saying this, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Pride can hinder our service, but Jesus served with humility. And finally, serve with joy. Serve with joy. Yep, serving God, serve with joy. Psalms 100. It says this, serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Serve the Lord with gladness. The person who serves with a smile is the best giver, because God loves a cheerful giver. Serve with joy. You don't know who you are serving. You don't know. Mother Teresa used to say, each one of them is Jesus in disguise. Each one of them is Jesus in disguise. You don't know. You don't know. It could be angels coming in the person. You don't know. Because Hebrews chapter 13 did says, isn't it? We may be entertaining angels unaware. Maybe Damien is an angel. Maybe you, who knows? Maybe Kengyo, you. I have a very strange encounter many years ago when I was a pastor at my old church. We run an evening service at 6 o'clock. And the worship team usually practice maybe about 4 o'clock. And I usually will attend the morning service. After the second service, I'll go home. And then I will return back about 5 to 5:30 for the evening service. One day about 4:15, one of the person in the worship band rang me up, said, Pastor, there's this lady who wants to see you. So I say, oh wow, 4:15, I'll come early. I came down with Lorna to the, you know what she's a beautifully young white woman with a child, very well dressed, drove a BMW. And then she said, can you please give me some money to buy food? I said, where do you live? She said, I live in Kew. Live in Kew, drive a BMW, dress well. Can you please help me? What do you do? I don't want to ask too many questions, even though I tried my best, but she's not in a position to explain or what. So I said, I won't give you money, but I can buy you food. So I asked Lorna to bring her to down Woolworth to buy some food. She said, any budget? I said, of course. Any budget? How come you? I'm not a free ATM machine. So Lorna bought her some nappies and bought some fruits and all that. And sent her, who is she? I don't know who she is. Why she dressed well, live in Q, drive a BMW and ask me for help? I don't know. I may be entertaining an angel, I don't know. I don't know. Serve the Lord with joy. Serve with joy. Because each one of them could be Jesus in disguise. Isn't that what Jesus actually said in Matthew 25 about the story of the sheep and the goat and all that? Isn't that what it says? As much as you've done it to the least of my brethren, you have done it unto me. So if your motivation is that you are doing it for Jesus, then that'll be all right, right? My final thing that I mentioned to you that I want to close off with, and that is in verse 17. wholehearted service brings blessings to your life. That is what Jesus says in verse 17. Brings blessing to your own life. He said, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. There are not many scripture passages that you can find that there is a direct blessing. You do this, you receive blessing. This is one of the few that Jesus said, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. God, or New Living Translation say, God will bless you for doing them. Service. Serving Jesus. God's blessing is often dependent on our obedience. When you obey, the blessing of God will come. Clarity will come if you walk in obedience. You're confused, clarity will descend upon you when you obey. Look at Hebrews 6 verse 10, one of my favorite verses to give to people who serve. You say, God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you have helped his people and continue to help them. Look at the first sentence. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work. God never forgets. No Alzheimer. He is never demented. God never forgets. He is not unjust. He never forgets what you have done for him. So the conclusion is that wholehearted service brings blessing to you as a person. So Christianity is not just about right now media, you consume and consume and consume and consume. But it is using what you have consumed, you learn, you grow, you go and use your hand to serve God. Os Guinness many years wrote a book called Fat Minds, Fit Bodies. So many Christians have fat minds and fit body. They have very fit body, but they don't know how to think biblically. And unless we all know, right? We don't just eat and eat and eat and eat. You exercise, right? It's the same. You consume, we learn, you listen to sermon, you go to KYB, you attend cell group, you learn. And then you use your hand to serve. Grow. And then your faith will grow when you serve God. When you use your gifts to serve, you will grow. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him. Let me conclude with this. When I was a young Christian, those days they are very popular with this kind of Christian tracts, a book, small little book like this. I came across this book called Holy Joe. The story is so impactful in my life, I still remember. So I went and Googled it, it's still there. Still there, you can get it, a PDF document and all that, called Holy Joe. It's in a comic kind of book in a sense, It was a story of a Christian soldier in a boot camp who knelt beside his bed every night to pray. The other soldiers in the barracks hurled insults at him and threw their boots at him. But he kept praying until after the others had fallen asleep. And in the morning, you know what happened? In the morning, when those soldiers woke up, they found their boots polished and shine right next to their beds. They continued to give the Christian soldier a hard time. And every morning the boots were shined and put in their place. Fewer and fewer boots were thrown, and one by one soldiers asked the Christian soldier about this faith of his. He didn't preach to them. He showed them love by serving them. They saw a humble servant and discovered that you can't fight with someone who serves like that. My friend, Jesus' example in John 13 is not just about washing feet. It's about a heart posture of love and service. And as we follow Christ, let us be known not for our position, but for our willingness to serve. Let us wash the feet of those around us, whether literally or figuratively, by humbling ourselves, forgiving others, and loving as Christ has loved us. Serve with love, serve with faithfulness, serve with humility, serve with joy, and serve God wholeheartedly.